Dustin Snyder, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you. I'm very happy you're having me.
It is a real pleasure to sit down with you. You're joining us from New York. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership, organizations, systems thinking, systems theory, and the systems methodology within organizations, and how to just have well-functioning organizations and employee behavior within those organizations. And you know, we all want well-functioning teams. We all want well-functioning organizations. And I have six children, ages 12 up through 22. And I always tell them, I'm like, because they're dealing with teenage stuff and young adult stuff, and they always talk about like when I get out of high school, things will like be you know normal, and like I won't have to deal with like the high school drama and stuff like that. I'm like, sorry to break
Yeah.
it to you, but when you get out into work, into the quote unquote real world, uh, that stuff doesn't go away. Like you still have drama, you still have pettiness, you still have immaturity, you still have bad behavior, you still have people who don't do their work, you still have freeloaders who like rely on other people to do all the work on your teams, you still like all the stuff that you deal with in like college projects that you hate, or like high school drama, or all those things. All that stuff still happens, right, when you go off into
You
the
might even have more of it.
workplace. Yeah, in some cases even more of it. And that's why you have managers, and that's why you have leaders, and that's why you have people trying to herd the cats when you go into the workplace, because it all still happens. And I wish it didn't. I wish we just had you know mature adults showing up to work each and every day, and just doing the work and reinforcing each other and having good behaviors and supporting each other and doing good stuff. But we all live messy lives. We all have competing priorities. We all have things pulling us in a bunch of different directions. I will say, and I tell this to my kids, I think most people are good people. I think most people, you know, are just doing the best they know how. I don't think most people wake up in the
Mhm.
morning thinking, I wonder how I'm going to take advantage of people today, and how I'm going to piss people off, and how I'm going to be a jerk. And, I think most people genuinely are trying to do a good job and are trying to do the best they can. But, everyone has their baggage, and everyone has their stuff, and everyone has their complicated lives, and it just is what it is. Like it's part of the human condition. And so that is what brings us to this conversation, is the complexity of the human condition in the workplace setting. What can we do about it? I'm excited to dig into this and to explore this with you. As we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about Dustin and his background with everybody. Dustin Snyder stewards the trajectories of companies navigating critical inflection points. As founder and chief advisor of Wayforward, he personally developed strategic workforce insight mapping, the diagnostic methodology that defines the standard for organizational behavior consulting, and wrote the book on it. Sink or Swim: Stop Managing Employee Behavior, Design Systems That Drive It, is the definitive framework for diagnosing and solving workforce dysfunction at its root, deployed across organizations nationwide, from family businesses navigating generational transition to Fortune 500 multinationals launching new divisions. Dustin's client portfolio spans mid-market companies in manufacturing, healthcare, professional services, agriculture, distribution, and hospitality, alongside divisions of large enterprises in aerospace and defense, SaaS, and advanced manufacturing. He works extensively with executive teams charged with managing challenging multi-stakeholder operations to build structures that can sustain aggressive growth while preserving founding values. And I've only scratched the surface. Like there's so much more I could say about Dustin and his background and all the cool things that he has done and is doing. But I'm going to pause there. Dustin, anything you would like to highlight by way of your own background or personal context before we move on?
No, I will say that the way that I got into doing what I do today was rather accidental. I would love to say that I designed things intentionally right from the beginning, but really I stumbled into realizing that a very rudimentary version of the way that I do things today worked within an organization, and then started to dive into the science to understand why it was working so effectively and so consistently.
Well, yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's probably true for most of us. Like, I think most people tend to have somewhat of a nonlinear kind of zigzaggy way of getting to where they end up. Um, like everyone except my wife. My wife figured out what she wanted to do like in high school, and then she like exactly linearly went at it, and then like that's what she's doing now. But that's like the super rare exception. Most people don't do that. Most people are kind of zigzaggy. But yeah, it's fun to hear about like your a little bit about your own path, and we can explore that a little bit more as we get into this. Certainly that's true though about me. So I can relate kind of as you're describing that a little bit. And I love as I'm reading your bio and as we're talking a little bit in the pre-interview, I just love hearing a little bit more about the work that you do, because it really is such a challenging thing within organizations, uh, because people are so complicated. I often tell, whether it's my kids, whether it's my students, whether it's clients, I often tell people like a lot of what we talk about, a lot of what you write about in your book, a lot of about what I teach, or these conversations that we have, it's not rocket science. Like this isn't like incredibly
No.
complicated stuff, but it's really hard to do, and it's hard because it just requires consistency. And consistency is really difficult for humans. Like it tends to be fairly simple principles. Like if we can just do these things consistently over time, we can nip a lot of the challenge, like the things that manifest over and over and over again. We can tend to nip
Mm-hmm.
those things in the bud uh,
Sure.
a lot, but we don't, and we don't because we can't do those things consistently, and then we just see the same things flare up over and over again. That's true in home life and marriage. That's true in communities. That's true in organizations. And so, yeah, we just tend to. That's why we have therapists. That's why we have HR specialists. That's why we have consultants. That's why we have all the things that we have, because humans are humans, and because humans are messy, and there's always going to be a need for these conversations and for this work. So, anyways, I appreciate all the work that you're doing to help move the needle on this, so that we can make workplaces more healthy, more productive, more an environment where people want to be. We spend most of our lives at work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The wild thing is, I thought about it that way for a long time, John, that things were messy and that things, the outcomes that we were getting from employees, from workforces, was this mysterious soft science that really couldn't be contained. And the realization that I came to that informs the workforce insight mapping method that I use today, is that it's actually not so messy as we like to believe it is. Our human behaviors are very much a hard science, and that's the conclusion that a lot of different fields are reaching.
Yeah, well, let's break that down. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Sure. So, so most leaders believe that they have a people problem when they're looking at a behavior, right?
Sure.
Um, they're they're looking at output and they're calling it a cause. And when you have outlier behaviors, if it's just Dustin or it's just John that's a jerk, right? Then yes, that's a character issue, and you have to address that individual. But if a common behavior shows up, disengagement, resistance to change, employee turnover, low performance, the instinct shouldn't be to fix the person. We so often move to retraining them, managing them
Yeah.
out, running the engagement survey, the culture initiative. But behavior, when it's a common behavior, when it's systemic within any portion of the workforce, that means that it's downstream of something. It's information for us. And so what leaders are actually looking at is a systems problem that has just found its expression in human behavior. So the people themselves can't be the problem. You can't fire everybody. You don't want to fire 20% of your workforce if they're doing the thing that the company exists to do. The conditions those people are operating inside of, that's the issue. And when
Yeah.
you learn to read that behavior, that common behavior, as a signal rather than a diagnosis, to see it as a rational response from your people, that will help you stop treating symptoms and wondering why nothing is holding.
I love the idea of being hard on systems, not on people, because I think
Mm-hmm.
you're absolutely right. So often we are very quick to go to the individuals, that are manifesting, certain behaviors, certain, uh, you know, they're not meeting quota, they're doing things we don't want them to do, or they're not doing things we want them to do. Um, okay, but what are the policies, practices, and procedures that are creating the environment in which these behaviors are happening, right? What types of support
Exactly.
or lack what types of support or lack of support is there, that is creating the environment in which this is occurring, right? All of that is part of the conversation, needs to be part of the conversation. Absolutely. And yeah, humans, like we function within like our bubble of constraints, right? So we have like this whole system around us that impacts how we make our decisions, how we behave, how we interact with each other. And so I think one of the things I really like about what you're saying is it's also it's a it's a useful and generous way to approach the types of employee problems and challenges that we face, because it's leadership
Mm-hmm.
taking ownership, right, of the systems and the challenges that the organization as the system is facing, rather than just passing blame down the line down to say frontline employees and saying you're the problem, now we're just going to lay you off, or now we're going to
Yes.
get rid of you. But we're going to say no, we own it, we have designed the system, this system has now created the environment in which you behave the way you behave, and we have to reflect on why. And that's a more uncomfortable kind of conversation for leaders to have. So it's no wonder
Yeah.
that we have um the kind of approach that is predominantly in existence, like where we tend to just have a performance improvement plan, and we'll just sit down the employee and say you need to fix this behavior, rather than actually say, okay, we have all these employees doing the exact same thing, or having this exact same type of symptom, instead of looking at the deeper root causes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And you use the word uncomfortable, and that is a very common initial reaction that I get from people in leadership roles. You actually use the word ownership,
Yeah.
because this means that you have a lot more responsibility and influence than you initially thought. What I mean is, if you put me in your environment, I will behave the way your environment produces. Not
Right.
because I'm weak or difficult or checked out, but because I'm human, and humans respond to their conditions. We always have. And that's not a character flaw necessarily in most people. It's hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation doing exactly what it's supposed to do. So when I hear a leader say to me, my people are change resistant, or they don't take accountability, or people just don't want to work anymore, my first question is always, what does the environment reward? What does it punish? What signals is it sending about what's actually safe here? And every time, the behavior that's driving the leader crazy makes complete sense once you see the system those people are living inside, and I'm able to connect those dots for that person.
Yeah, and let's take that a little bit further. So you're having these conversations with leaders, you're challenging them a little bit, you're making them a little bit uncomfortable. Um, you've just made that comment back to them. How do they tend to respond to that? And how do you move the conversation forward?
Hmm. Um, that's the cool thing. So the organizations I work with kind of fall into two main buckets. That I do often come in when a leadership team is doing well and things are going excellently, and they recognize that there is value in investing in this kind of thing to understand their organization better. Or it's when this is not a natural thing for them to look at, and they don't necessarily they didn't come into it valuing it, but they are at enough of a pain point where they need that outside opinion. And so I think generally they're at a place of uh, individual acceptance of, okay, we need to understand this issue better because it's affecting our bottom line, and we need a third set of eyes on this. And so it's challenging because there's an emotional intelligence that needs to happen to when I connect the dots for an executive to show them that, hey, you're concerned that your frontline employees aren't displaying accountability, but when I sit in on your C-suite meetings, neither are you guys. And to show them, behavior modeling is one of the things I see in a lot of organizations, that the way leadership acts, the VPs act, and the way the VPs act, the directors act, and the managers act, and the supervisors act, and then it reaches the front line, because we're learning, that psychology. Our brain is seeing the behaviors of leadership and saying, okay, this is how I need to behave to be successful in this environment. And so I think that, it's not just me coming in, it's not just some guy saying, hey, you're doing things wrong, but it's connecting the dots for them to show them to trace back to the root causes of why things are occurring and how their people are learning how to behave, to show them that, hey, and our brains are telling us you need to behave this way to survive in the environment. And you can tell people to change their behavior, but their brain won't let them as long as the environment hasn't changed.
So there's a lot of like, management science, organizational science around these topics, right? That's been out, I don't know, certainly 50, 80 plus years, in
Mhm.
the management literature and whatnot. You also draw a lot upon like the clinical psychology, the family systems, literature on the work that you do. Um, Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, why do you feel it's important to draw upon that body of work as well? Like, what's lacking in the org science work, and how does that other
Yeah,
work complement it?
yeah. I've found that the org science literature out there, um, that is accessing this systems theory around human behavior, is not very widely recognized. Um, and I guess to answer your question more directly, I think org science has been trying to treat work like it was separate from the reality of being human. And I recognize that that was a losing proposition. I've already said we bring all these hundreds of thousands of years of evolution through that door every single morning. Like you said, we spend most of our time at work. Our brains can't opt out of that. And so much of HR and management practice is built on these frameworks that are kind of based on this fantasy that we check all that at the door. And that kept disappointing me, because it works logically. You can walk someone through the logic, but then it just doesn't take root. It doesn't get traction with people. So what cracked it open for me was when I started seeing systems theory show up in clinical psychology, and the insight that individual pathology wasn't just about individual character. It was about the system that that person was embedded in, the family, the environment, the currents running through the whole thing. And I thought, if that's true in a clinical setting, why would it be any less true in an organizational setting, in a group one? you're a group, you're in a family group, you're in a company group. And then I started looking across different fields to see if other scientific fields were reaching the same conclusion. And they were. Behavioral economics, psychology, the family therapy angle, even hard sciences like physics. The pattern just kept showing up that the system will beat the individual every time. And once I saw that, I really couldn't unsee it.
That raises an interesting point for me. So you have this interesting tension, I think. So you have like the system pressures versus like the human rational like uh autonomy. Um so a lot of what you're talking about is based on the assumption of rational thinking, right? Like I as a human being, I operate as a rational being. I make rational choices. Um, and I operate rationally within the system that I operate, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit more about that though, because like within a deterministic system, right? Which these systems theories all kind of uh, operate on, like that's kind of the way they function. Um, yeah, there's a bit of that tension. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So it's the way that I started seeing this. It's not a predetermination.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not that we're no longer captains of our own ship, so to speak, but it's that the variables in our environment will produce certain behaviors. And a really early example that started to clue me into this, that hey, I as the person who considers themselves very high functioning and ambitious and driven and is in executive roles, um, when I started to realize that I would act the same way if I was placed in the shoes of the frontline employees that I was hoping would behave differently. I think absenteeism is a great example. I've had the great experience of having worked in a number of dysfunctional organizations as I came up through my career. And absenteeism was always a huge problem. I worked in one organization where over 20% of the employees were absent on any given day. And the research shows us that the tighter, the stricter the attendance policy is, the more people will call off, which is very counterintuitive. And when I saw that, I said, okay, why would that be? Because there's a punishment there, right? There's a reward system there. And I thought about my own experience, and I thought, okay, I will come into work sick as a dog, at least pre-COVID, back when you could be sick at work without people worrying, because I cared about the outcomes. I cared about the team. A lot of my self-concept was tied into the outcomes I was producing at work. But if somebody in above me in the chain of command would do something that would disengage me, would shut down a project, or would make a poor decision, or would do something that would tick me off, I would probably call in the next day, even though I would be there when I could legitimately use a sick day. I would call in when I didn't want to be at work. And so I realized that the root cause of a lot of the absenteeism is people simply don't want to be there because of whatever the reason is. And if I would do that, the person who's giving 200% every day, of course, somebody else is going to do that too. So I think this is a very simple and micro example, but I hope it gets across the fact that people are influenced by their environment, and it will override your overarching individual character and cause you to behave in ways that have to feel rational, because we can all put ourselves in those shoes.
And I appreciate that. And I think coming back to a little bit of what I said earlier, I think that also gives us a little bit more empathy, perhaps. around just the types of behaviors that we do observe, right? When we do see behaviors that we, get frustrated with, or I, I tell my students, a story about like the frustrations around doing team projects. When I was a college student, and now I'm a professor and I assign team projects, and I know they get frustrated with them. And what was it? Is it the nature of team projects that they have to be frustrating and that they have to be dysfunctional, and that some students are going to take advantage and not do anything while other students get stuck with all the work? Does it have to be that way? No, it doesn't have to be that way. It's a function of, well, somewhat it's a function of individuals on the teams. It's somewhat a function of just human behavior, right? But it's also a function of how the assignment is designed, and how the course is set up, and
Mhm.
how the professor sets up the teams, and how the accountability systems are set up around the assignment, right? And learning from my own experiences as a student and the frustrations that I had, I spent a lot of time looking into how can I create effective, positive team assignments. So not only can my students have a good positive experience in my class, but they can also learn like a good example of like what they could do and carry forward into the workplace. So when they're running teams, they have a template even of like something that is positive and something that is proactive and something that is possible to, that they could do. And it makes all the difference in the world. And just because someone, you know, may not be as inclined to speak up in a team meeting doesn't mean that they're a freeloader. Doesn't mean that they're, someone who doesn't want to do work. It may be that you as the one who wants to get the A are overbearing, and you're like talking down to them, and like there's all these different things that go into it, right? And so you have to build in um the processes and the systems around how that can function effectively, and how there's
Yeah.
accountability around that functioning, right? And it's amazing
Yeah.
once you do
And a
that.
lot of times,
Once you do that, it actually can work.
yeah, a lot of times the cool thing about systems is that the issues that come up within other parts of the organization, they're not intentional things that leadership is doing on purpose to, to tick me off and make me call in. But there are things that make people's lives harder than they need to be. There are things that get in the way of them being successful in the goals and the expectations that are placed on them. And they're very often just things that leadership doesn't realize, simply because we stand at different vantage points. Leadership isn't in the day to day. They're not doing the thing that you do because we have different jobs, we have different responsibility sets, and we're spending our attention on totally different parts of the organization, different parts of the business. And so really just mapping these human behaviors for the leadership team and showing them, here's why you're getting the behavioral outcome that you are because of XYZ variable in this division or this department. It's usually a really simple change for them to say, oh, I didn't realize that was happening, let's fix that. And they change that one little thing, and there's a completely different variable. And the fact that you're listening, just like you said in the group project. Hey, I didn't contribute because I felt like I was, I didn't have anywhere to contribute because, Mr. Straight A's was just taking over the whole thing, and I didn't have a chance to discuss the part that I wanted to do. I didn't have the opportunity to bring up this thing that I wanted to contribute to the project. And that's a very simple, easy fix in the assignment design, like you were saying. And it's very often the case that tiny little changes that have nothing to do with compensation or benefits or these worrisome expensive things that leadership thinks are going to come out. It's usually small simple changes that just make people's lives easier and get barriers out of their way, which is really ultimately the entire function of leadership, is to just get barriers out of the way of people that don't have enough influence to get them out of their own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dustin, this has just been a great conversation. I note the time. I need to let you go, but before we wrap things up, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, where they can find your book, etc., and then give us the final word for today.
Sure, sure. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, not because I generate business there, but because I know my clients' employees like to check out this Dustin guy and see, what the heck he's doing in this organization. And because I can't keep my mouth shut, I guess. But so I'm very active on LinkedIn, Dustin Snyder. My book came out last month. It's called Sink or Swim. It's on Amazon as well as Barnes and Noble. And the Audible version is coming out in the next couple weeks for the audiobook. I was very lucky that the president of the American Medical Association sat down to write the foreword for the book for me. So that is a really cool perspective. And, especially my healthcare clients are very into that as well. No, this has been a wonderful conversation, John. And I really appreciate you sitting down and have it with me.
Thank you so much, Dustin. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Dustin can do for you, check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. They can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.